Good evening, everyone. I would like to open today's session by acknowledging that we are situated on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We are grateful to live, learn, and meet as guests on these lands, and we acknowledge this territory's significance to the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to this land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants today. My name is Jennifer Reynolds. I'm a 2013 graduate of the Smith School of Business and a proud founding member of the Queer Alumni Chapter at Queen's University. Our chapter president, Stacey Kelly, couldn't be here tonight, but he sends his thanks to all of you for taking the time to be part of this critical conversation tonight. Our queer chapter started in December 2020. Our goal is to build connections between and foster support for our 2S LGBTQ alumni. As I look around the room tonight, I see that we are well on our way to accomplishing this goal, and the conversation today is a marker in that mission. I encourage you all who are interested in getting involved with our queer chapter to reach out to myself or one of our volunteers after the event. Many of the topics that will be discussed today may be sensitive to people in the room and make you feel uncomfortable. Please note that at any point in time, if you need to disengage from the conversation to step outside of the room, please do so. Put yourself first and your personal safety. We do have on-site emotional support resources available. So Rob, at the back of the room here, he'll wave. He is available on site tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. just outside these doors in room 230. Again, at any point in time, please feel free to disengage and step out of the room if any of this material is sensitive or making you feel uncomfortable. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dean Mark Walters to the stage.
Thanks very much, Jen, for the introduction. And thank you to the Queen's Queer Alumni Chapter for welcoming us all this evening. I am, as Jen said, Mark Walters. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Law at Queen's. It's really my honor to be able to represent Queen's along with Karen Bertrand, whom you'll be hearing from later. I'm here really representing the law school, but also the Smith School of Business, the Queen's Alumni, Toronto Alumni Branch as well. And we're all here to welcome our exceptional speaker and sessional moderator for this event. I'll get to them in a moment, but first I'd like to thank you all for attending and taking part in this discussion of difficult issues that relate to the administration of justice, and in particular relating to missing persons investigations, and the historical barriers and prejudices that have affected so many individuals in Toronto and the wider communities. Restorative justice and equality before the law are critical themes at our law school in terms of our academic, research, and advocacy priorities, as well as our commitment to ensure that our school is representative of the diverse society it serves. Queen's Law and also Queen's University in general, we're all dedicated to equity, diversity, inclusion, indigeneity, and reconciliation so that individuals from culturally, racially, and socioeconomically diverse backgrounds can flourish. Tonight's event, I think, is a perfect example of what it means to come together and collaborate to make meaningful change and to build a stronger community. We come together at events like this to help address systemic discrimination against members of the LGBTQ2S+ and racialized communities, and to improve access to justice and fairness in our justice system. Tonight's moderator is Pam Rick. Pam obtained her bachelor's degree in social science from the University of Ottawa in 2007, her law degree from Queen's in 2013, and her Master of Laws degree, LLM, from New York University in 2019. She's the Executive Director and General Counsel of the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund in Toronto, also known as LEAF, where she provides leadership support direction to advance gender equality through litigation, law reform, and public education. Of course, we're proud of all of our law school alumni, but we're particularly proud of Pam. She served as a legislative advisor to the Attorney General of Ontario, clerked at the Federal Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada, practiced law at Stockwoods, a boutique litigation firm. I believe she was the chair of the board of this institution, the 519, until quite recently. And she's been recognized as a leader to be proud of by Start Proud, a precedent setter by Precedent Magazine, and a Douglas Miller Rising Star by the Canadian Bar Association, and last but not least, by us at Queen's Law, the recipient of the Dan Soberman Outstanding Young Alumni Award for Early Career Success. So thank you, Pam, for joining us this evening. I think I'm now supposed to invite you to your chair. And now it's my immense honor to introduce our speaker for the evening, the Honourable Gloria J. Epstein. Justice Epstein has 45 years of experience in the Canadian legal profession as a lawyer, as a trial judge, as an appellate judge, and as the leader of complex government reviews on public issues of a pressing nature. Justice Epstein graduated from Queen's in 1972. Congratulations, Gloria, on your 50th anniversary. Had to slip that one in, where she obtained an honors Bachelor of Commerce degree. She obtained her law degree from the University of Toronto and went on to practice at several large Toronto firms before, in 1985, branching out and starting her own firm, one of the first firms to be led by women. In 1993, she was appointed to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, and in 2007 to the Court of Appeal for Ontario. I thought I would mention a case, of course, the 1996 decision in M&H, in which she held that the definition of spouse within the Ontario Family Law Act discriminates against same-sex couples, a decision that was eventually upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada in an historic judgment. I think it was in the course of that decision where she wrote the following: "It is difficult for the legislature to change the law in a particularly unpopular way, even if to do so would enhance a constitutionally protected right. It is precisely for this reason that an independent judiciary must take appropriate action." And that's the kind of ethic that I think has served all of us well, so thank you. In 2021, prompted by the disappearances of several people connected with Toronto's gay village, many of whom were found to be murdered by Bruce McArthur, Justice Epstein engaged in an inquiry on these sensitive topics, on the handling of these issues, and this led to an important report. I want to mention as well Justice Epstein's many community contributions, which include the founding of the Murtry Gardens of Justice, co-chairing the Ontario Justice Education Network, and serving as the director of the Canadian Women's Foundation. She's currently a member of the Pathways to Education National Board of Directors, the Sinai Health Foundation Board of Directors, and the Smith School of Business Advisory Board. So I now want you all to welcome Justice Epstein, who So before I turn things over to Pam and Gloria, I just want to mention that after the events here in this room, we invite you all to attend the Glad Day Bookshop just down the street, several minutes walk south, for a reception. And it is generously sponsored by the law firm of Dentons. I hope to see you there. Over to you, Pam.
Thanks, Mark. I was saying to a friend earlier today, a friend who's here this evening, that it sometimes feels like it's never going to end. It feels like we will always be planning vigils and days of remembrance for our murdered trans and queer siblings, and it feels overwhelming. It feels like we will always be fighting for the right to live, for our Black, Indigenous, and racialized queer, trans, non-binary, and two-spirit siblings to live, let alone to live with dignity and with access to health care and housing and employment and food. I am grateful, however, to be here with many members of our community this evening, because I think there is strength in community, but we shouldn't have to keep doing this. And I want members of our community who are here to remember that you are seen, you are loved, you are valued, and we will continue to fight because we have to, and because we will in the face of rising tides of hatred that tries to erase us. So I am truly pleased to be here this evening with you, Justice Epstein, to have this conversation about your work and most prominently your work on the Missing and Missed review. So the first part of our conversation will be focused primarily on that issue, but I want to take us back a few years before that, before we get to the Missing and Missed review. As Mark mentioned, way back in 1996, you were a trial judge in a case called M&H, years and years before there was a right to same-sex marriage in Canada. And the decision that you wrote for the first time found that excluding same-sex couples from the definition of spouse under Ontario's Family Law Act violated our rights to equality under the Charter, and the Supreme Court ultimately upheld your decision. How did you think about the significance of that case at the time that you heard it?
It's really interesting to take me back there, because there's so much of life, my life, actually wrapped up in the answer to that question. And without dragging this on for the next 2 hours, which I could easily do, let me just say this, how I got the case. I've been congratulated many times for my decision in M&H, and I always say the same thing. I just happened to be in that office at that time when the file landed on my desk. And I'm quite sure that any other judge who had that file land on his or her desk would have come to the same conclusion. I can't be sure of that, positively sure of that, but it was so compelling. Anyway, so it was my first week, and I volunteered for family law because I was nervous. And I thought, family law will be an easy place for me to kind of slide into. my feet weren't, yeah, right. And little did I know that on the fourth day, when they brought in my files for the fifth day, being Friday of my first week, I'd go home and take the files home, and one was a motion for interim support, and I thought, how hard can that be? It was actually, of course, M&H. And I opened it up and I went, oh, how could this be I thought, how could this be a problem? I just didn't actually understand it. I mean, it was my first week. And so Mary Eberts and Martha McCarthy appear in front of me the next day, talk about being scared. And, Mary Eberts just simply said, the law doesn't allow people in same-sex relationships access to the Family Law Act, many provisions anyway, including support. So we had to kind of take a bit of a different route, and I found support for the other spouse through the Oppression Act, actually. And the case traveled through the courts, changes in governments. It took a while. I heard the case, I think about 2 years later, in early July. And this is where life comes in again. The case was scheduled to be heard, and there had been a lot of attention to the case, obviously, and there had been a lot of delay, mainly because of the change in governments and the changing in positions that the provincial government, the provincial government had taken in its argument before me. And on July 1st of that year, my sister died of cancer. But the date was set about a week later, and I wanted to meet my responsibility to the parties and to the court, so I heard the case. And it wasn't until maybe October that I had the physical and emotional strength to open it up, to start to think about it and write it. I couldn't read my writing. I couldn't read the notes I had taken in court that day. So I had to figure it out from the beginning, and obviously I had some help from my notes, but it was a very difficult time. I didn't trust my notes, I didn't trust myself, I didn't trust how I absorbed things in court. But I worked all through that fall, and I released the decision in January. As soon as I released it, I flew down to New Brunswick to visit my son at university for a long weekend. And when I came back, the papers were full of articles about my decision. I didn't expect that. It was a decision, it was the right decision. Why was it a big deal? Well, we're here because it was a big deal. I didn't see that at the time, to answer your question. I just thought it was the right thing to do. It was the obvious thing to do. And I got threats. We had police in front of our door for a while. I mean, it was, and I'm not complaining, I'm expressing incredulity. I just couldn't really grasp the negative sentiment. And some law professor, the dean, it was actually from Western Law School, you would remember his name if I could. He wrote this scathing article in the Globe and Mail that if I were one of his students, he'd fail me on all subjects. And I mean, it was humiliating. And I thought, maybe I got it wrong. But I knew I hadn't. And then, of course, it goes to the Court of Appeal. Bit of a nail-biter there with Justice Findlayson dissenting. And he was quite rough on me in his dissent. And then goes up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And of course they did the right thing. Of course they did. Now, but back to the question, it was something that, could I foresee the significance? While I was writing it, I knew it was important because it hadn't been done before, but I didn't attach anything more than that to it. It was just I was doing the right thing, and any other judge would have done that. But as the interest mounted, and conversations and people asking me to make, to comment on it and everything, I could see that this thing had legs. It had legs then, it still has legs, and we've got a long way to go. And thank goodness we have good people in this room and all over the world, actually. And God, do we need it? Do we need it? To move the distance that you were speaking of in your original remarks. So I'm going to end answering the question here with this, and that is, I want to thank you for organizing this event. I want to thank those who've been involved in putting it together. I know how hard you've been working. I want to thank all of you for participating in this critical conversation. I think that was a great expression. And I want to thank you for allowing me to join you. I think we're going to accomplish something tonight. And I will, with that, turn it over to you.
Yeah, we are very fortunate to have you as part of this conversation. So I'm very grateful that you accepted to be here and that you're sharing this living history with us. But you mentioned the negative reactions to MNH when it was released, but obviously there's also quite a bit of fanfare that followed from many communities, and in history MNH holds an important role. When you were writing it, and when you were sort of dealing with responses, both positive and negative after the fact, how did that shape your engagement with 2S LGBTQ communities and issues impacting us in the years to come?
In the years to come is the key to your question. There are two segments. One is when I was a judge, and one was when I was when I say released from the shackles of being a judge, I mean that with no disrespect. I loved every minute of the 25 years I served as a member of the court in Ontario. But for good reason, you are confined. From supporting charities and all kinds of things. You can't speak out loud about contentious issues. You just can't, and nor should you. Mm-hmm. So while I was a judge, and I like to think all of my colleagues felt and feel this way, you don't go into court and consider an issue with a mission, with an objective, other than justice. That's all. Truth. You figure out what's going on. You try anyway. And you apply the law, and you come up with the best possible result you can, and that's justice and you obviously a lot of values infused in there. And sure, different judges will see things slightly differently. I like to put it this way. There are the normal judges, there's the bleeders, and there's the hemophiliacs. And I was somewhere in there, but short of a hemophiliac. But we all have different personalities, different lens through which we look at things, different sympathies, but we don't champion them. We're different people, and that affects our decisions, but we don't champion them.
You said it comes in two parts, and maybe I'm leading
okay.
a little bit further.
Right, sorry, I forgot the second part. The second part was after I left the court. Now I can do anything I want. I can speak here. I can work for 3 years on the review and say what I want in the report, which I did. And right now I've entered yet another stage in my career as an arbitrator and mediator. And little did I know I would feel so fulfilled by doing what I'm doing now, because I'm helping people come to a resolution of their problems in a way in which both sides or all sides make a contribution. I find that tremendously rewarding. Instead of sitting up there and say, you won, you lost, and here's why, and somebody always limps out. I'm saying, okay, let's work together and see if both sides can make the best of what they can walk away with. Both of you are going to walk away with slightly unhappy, but as the days to come, you'll be really happy that you maintained control of the process and it's over. And it's hugely rewarding. So now I am in a position where I can do this, and I hope to be more involved because this kind of stuff's really important to me.
So we're sort of tracking, 15 to 20 years after M&H, and I'll let people know that this is where we're going to jump into talking about some of the events leading up to the Missing and Missed review. Between 2010 and 2017, 8 men disappeared from our community here in the village, and I want to say their names because they are important. Salim Essen, Andrew Kinsman, Majid Kayan, Dean Lisowick, Sarush Mahmoodi, Skandaraj Navaratnam, Abdul Basir Faizi, and Krishna Kanagaratnam. Members of our community had warned of a serial killer during that time. However, it wasn't until 2018 that the perpetrator was arrested and charged and subsequently pled guilty to the murders. In 2017, Tess Ritchie's body was found in an outdoor stairwell on Church Street, just down the street here, and her killer was convicted of first-degree murder in 2020. And then also in 2017, the body of Allura Wells, the trans woman who was loved, was found in a ravine, and nobody has been held accountable for her death. And around the same time in 2016, Toronto police carried out a sting operation targeting gay men engaging in sex acts, allegedly in Marie Curtis Park in Etobicoke. I recount all of this to set a scene for my coming question, because this is yet another period of extreme pain and trauma and devastation for our communities, which have highlighted again for many of us the ways in which police have over-criminalized and underprotected us. So At this point in 2018, you're a judge of the Court of Appeal for Ontario, and you're approached by the Toronto Police Services Board to head the independent civilian review into missing persons investigations, to look at police investigation processes surrounding the disappearances of these 8 murdered men, Ms. Ritchie and Ms. Wells. You choose to retire from the court to accept this mandate. Why was it important for you to say yes, and what did you hope to achieve?
To answer that question, I have to correct one thing you said, that I was approached by the Toronto Police Services Board to head up the review. The Chief Justice was actually, Justice Strathy, was actually approached by the Toronto Police Services Board and by the Mayor. And I think, yeah, those are the two who approached Chief Justice Strathy and asked him to release me for a period of time to do this review. I found out about it after he said no. So he came into my office one day, I'm working away, and he closes the door and sits down. He said, I feel I should tell you something. I said, sure. And he said, you've been asked to head up this review, and he described it. And he said, you were specifically identified by the people who asked for the review, who agitated for it, got an agreement that there would be a review, and then specifically identified you, Gloria, to be the reviewer. I was approached by these people, and the chair of the Police Services Board and the mayor came in to see me, told me that history, and asked me to release you for the amount of time it would take you to oversee the review. And I said, really? You know, and he said, yes, and I said, no. And I said, why? And he said, because I need you here. And I said, yes, but frequently. I mean, Justice Rouleau is in Ottawa right now. I mean, this wouldn't be the first time this has happened. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know, I always have to look at the resources of the court. He had a good argument. We were short-staffed. We were down 2 appointments. Justice Tulloch was working on an independent review at the time, and he couldn't afford the manpower, the people power. And we had several discussions about it, always amicable, but he was dug in. I came up with, you have no idea the arguments I came up with. They're actually, some of them were pretty good, but he wouldn't budge. So finally I went into his office. This went on for about a week. And I closed the door and I said, have you, can I, he says, there's nothing more you can say. I said, the only thing I can say is that I'm leaving the court. And he said, nobody ever leaves the Court of Appeal. And I just looked at him and I said, I think I just did. That's exactly how it happened. And obviously we remained friends, and he understood. It wasn't the easiest decision. I'm being a bit sort of cavalier about it. It was hard because being a judge on that court was a tremendous privilege. But the review called to me more. It took me back to MNH. And your first question was an important one. How did it change you? Without realizing it, how it had impacted my life, because I kind of carried it with me in ways I didn't even understand. And they just had a little party for me. It was my 25th anniversary of my being appointed to as a judge, and I thought, 25 years, this is a good time, a watch or something, and I'll move on. And I have never once doubted I've never questioned whether I made the right choice. The review, I've said so many times in so many speeches, people look at me like, she's really saying that? I say it because it's true. What I learned from the people in the communities I got to know during those 3 years, what I learned from them, I never would have learned. And I thought because when I was growing up, I served hot dogs in the Dominion store. I served pancakes. I was a cocktail waitress. I was a coach. I always dealt with people, and I love to connect with people. And I owned a fishing camp on an island in northern Ontario. Even when the weather's bad and you don't catch a fish, I can make somebody laugh. But the people I met in the communities to which I had access, thanks to my board of advisors, Haran Vizjanathan is here, and he's one of them, changed my life. And so what I've said that I think has caused some eyebrows to raise, but it's the truth. If I had done the review before I'd started to become a judge, I would have been a better judge. I would have been a better judge. I mean, it's never going to happen because you have to have the purchase of being a judge to be able to have that opportunity, so it's a bit upside down. But am I glad I had that chance, and it's changed my life.
So you quit the court, you accept the mandate, you get your watch.
No watch.
You're off to the races. Can you talk a little bit about how you assembled your team and some of the key learnings that you took from those consultations that you ended up doing?
I assembled my team. There's a two-word answer to that. Mark Sandler. Mark Sandler is some wise person, because I talked to a number of judges who had done this, and I said, where do you start? And they said, start by picking your legal counsel, your lead, and get somebody who's done it before and who is respected and who's a rock star. I mean, it has to be Mark Sandler. There are some others, but nobody's like him. And I approached him. Thank goodness he said yes. And he's done a lot of these. He did the inquiry in Thunder Bay. I mean, he just come off that one. And so he sat down with me and he said, now, the next most important thing you're going to do after hiring me is to pick my advisory council from representative members of the communities. I say communities, and boy, did I learn a lesson. The very first meeting I had to meet with one of the groups, many groups I met with to obtain information that would inform my review, I said something about the LGBTQ2S+ community. And I got jumped on. I mean, jumped on. And, clearly I didn't understand. I said, maybe I don't, but I'd like to. And they said, we're not just a community, we are communities. I don't even think I can say it in the singular anymore. My advisory committee gave me access to Indigenous, trans. It was, we met, I listened, they taught me, and as I've said before, they gave me access. I spent three or 4 hours inside Maggie's, a facility in Toronto that provides support for sex workers. And nobody could believe that I got inside Maggie's. So it's, in answer to your question, how I started, I listened to Mark. I interviewed a lot of people over a number of months to select who I thought were the top-notch people to provide me with advice and access, and I got them. And then we went out to use that access, those opportunities to set up meetings, and I started to listen. I never, ever had anyone come to my office. I went to them, which is why I went to Maggie's and other places where I sat down with them, and I just listened to them. And I didn't sit there as a judge. I sat there just at a table somewhere and just listened to them. And one of the challenges I had, and I talked to Mark about this, I said, how do I know it's true? because there's no video. There's no affidavit. There's no cross-examination. And he said, all you can do is look for patterns. And the penny dropped, and he said, that's, if enough people tell you the same thing over and over again, then truth will emerge. But it was a whole new process for me because as a judge, I was used to having proven evidence. This guy comes in his coat and boots and his hair's all wet, it's probably raining. And those are the kinds of things you look at as a judge, but we didn't have that. So it was a challenging, they were challenging times. We worked really hard. I don't think I've ever worked that hard. And it was the experience of a lifetime. I'd do it again in a minute.
You developed 151 recommendations that were contained in the report for the Toronto Police Service in regard to the handling of missing persons investigations. And we saw that the Toronto Police Service immediately committed to implementing all 151 the day the report was released. Now, as of today, if you go online, you can sort of see the update of what recommendations have been enacted, what are being worked on, what have yet to be started on. And if you look at that tool today, a year and a half after your report was released, we see that 12 recommendations have been implemented of the 151, 87 are in progress, and 52 are not yet started. I want to ask, what's your perspective on the progress that's been made so far on your recommendations?
48 hours ago, I would have said, I am concerned, quite concerned. My perspective has changed, well, 24 hours, in the last 24 hours. But let me just give some context to that. When I released my report, I did something that I am told no reviewer or commissioner has ever done, and that is I've offered my services to help the implementation committee with free of charge in whatever way I could help. I could go away and not get involved, or I could attend meetings and just sit in the background and every once in a while say, you know, this one's bothering me or not, or I could be part of one particular committee. Whatever level you want me, or not at all, I'm there for you. And the reason, I can't explain why others don't offer that. I think a lot of them go back to busy jobs and things, and that's fine, I understand that. But I just was so invested in this, and I just didn't want this sitting on, you know, gathering dust. I just wasn't going to let that happen. And if I could help, I'd be there. What I didn't realize is a lot of things. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to get the ball rolling. You're trying to do something that's never been done before. And you're putting together members of the community that it's not in it, communities that are not in themselves a unit, to be part of this implementation committee together with police officers who have never done this kind of work before or been asked to. And then you're asking all of them to play nice in the sandbox. And so you're people who've never worked before, don't have, you know, a strong base of communication, and in one half have never worked actually with each other in a committee kind of setting. It took longer than I thought for the interviews to take place on both of the right police officers to be part of the committee and the members of the communities. And then a working relationship had to be established. And this was all during COVID. So to the extent that I was starting to get agitated, it was because it's my nature, but also I didn't fully appreciate how complex the challenge was. And I would regularly be in contact with Haran and Pauline, who's now acting deputy chief, who headed up the implementation committee as co-chairs, two people in whom I have enormous confidence. And I didn't feel like I was contributing, so I just stayed by the side, which is something I offered. I mean, if you don't want me to help, that's fine too. I'm not imposing myself on you. And we went through a period of time, and thank goodness Haran came up with a way in which I could stay connected without interfering. And so we set up regular meetings, and I don't attend individual meetings, and it would be inappropriate anyway. But I'm kept informed so I can ask and suggest and stuff, and that's working well. But I still didn't know what the heck was going on. I really didn't, and I mean no disrespect when I say that. And two things I think came up at the same time. One of them is this meeting. And the other is we have a new chief of police. And I don't know for sure, but I think somebody got the idea that it would be a good idea for me to meet the new chief, because Chief Designate Demkew and I will be working together as the implementation is completed. And before tonight, so I could be brought up to speed. That meeting took place, it took around 2 hours yesterday afternoon. Who gets that kind of access? To the current chief and the chief designate and other members of the command and other busy people for that kind of time. And I must say, and I think by now you should know, I say it as it is, I don't have a horse in this race, except that things get done properly, in a proper fashion, as good as they can possibly be done so that the recommendations are fully implemented as the report contemplates. That's my horse. But I sat there ready to criticize and ready to be the tough guy, and I didn't have to. I did say, you've got a real problem with communication, as is often the case. When you try to find out what the heck's going wrong and something's going sideways and you can't figure out, there's often not a real problem. The problem is communication. And that's exactly where we were yesterday, and everybody recognized it. And so I alone didn't come up with it. I said, what about using social media? What about having a town hall meeting on the 2nd anniversary of the release of my report? You know, what about other ways to keep the public, instead of having to go into the website and searching for the list and seeing the 151 recommendations, and what does it tell you? Nothing, except the numbers. It doesn't even tell you of the 50 some odd that are underway, or however many of them are underway, how far they are. Are they 5 minutes underway, or are they 5 minutes away from being completed? And so we had that kind of discussion yesterday. I got home, and I sat there and I did emails to the chief and to Pauline and to Haran and others who were there, and I said, thank you. And what I should have also said is, I'm sorry that I doubted you, but I left that part out. But I will tell you from my heart that, number one, I appreciate how hard they've been working. Number two, I believe as I'm sitting here that they are firmly committed to use every resource they can and do the best job they possibly can to get these recommendations implemented. It's not going to be easy. The process won't be perfect. It's going to take longer than they thought. And I said to the chief designate, how are you looking me on? Are you telling me you will have the resources to finish this? There'll be enough money, enough people. You're not going to pull the plug on this thing until all 151 are done. Look me in the eye and tell me that. He said, you will. So I understand why there are people in the communities who are saying, what the heck, or other things. And I get it, but as of late yesterday afternoon, I feel a whole lot better about it, and I hope you do too.
So you have the commitment from the chief designate, and some of your concerns have been addressed after that meeting. If you sort of think about, I ask you to think 15 to 20 years into the future here, what do you hope that the impact and legacy of your review will be?
One thing I should share with you in answer to that question is the reach of this thing, which is another part of the good news. I'm actually quite both astonished and pleased. In the last year and a bit since I released the report, I have been interviewed for documentaries, podcasts. I've given innumerable speeches. I have written forwards to books. You name it. And this isn't just obviously in Toronto. I have spoken in other cities and obviously through Zoom in other countries. And last week, I was asked to participate in 3 different ventures. One, hold on to your seats, one in Ukraine. That I would be part of a teaching panel that is being sponsored by a university in the US to talk about the rights of marginalized and vulnerable communities generally, as I understand it. I have a meeting on Friday to go into it more. I know very little about it. And part of its target audience are people in Ukraine. I'm going, this is fabulous. So when you talk about 15 to 20 years, we're only 1.5 years out. And it's changed Toronto for sure. What I heard at the meeting yesterday, it's changed the way the police service works. Do you know, one of the things that was in the report is you have to have a dedicated missing persons unit. They only put that in the middle of my report so they didn't look so bad at the end. And it had 2 people in one desk and a $50,000 budget. They now have 10 people. And they now have this and that and the other thing, and they are serious. But here's the big one. It's called, and what they call things in the service and is all important to them. I think it's hilarious. But it's called the Missing Person and Homicide Unit. There's nothing more important in the police service than the homicide unit. And to have it now called Missing Person and Homicide Unit is a big deal. That's what they call it in the UK. Because in the United Kingdom, missing persons are treated with the same degree of concern, resources, anxiety as homicide victims are, which is, I'm still trying to figure that out. I mean, it's wonderful, I'm still trying to figure it out, why the 2 countries are so diametrically different on that. But the police service isn't just saying we're going to implement her recommendations and maybe she'll go away. Maybe. But we are changing as a service, and I think there are changes taking place in other parts of Canada and other countries. Mm-hmm. It's not enough. It's not fast enough. It's not soon enough, and lots didn't have to happen for this to start, but it is a start.
Well, I hope that your optimism proves well-founded, and you know better than anybody at this point the relationship with our communities that we've had historically, that we've had as communities with the police, and there's a lot of trust for them to try to rebuild, or to build in the first place, quite frankly, and a lot of things to accomplish for, I'm going to say many of us, to have the same sort of faith. But
I appreciate the sharing of your perspectives on this, and with that, I will bring to a conclusion the first part of our conversation. I know we're running a little bit behind, and I apologize to the organizers for that. But we'll break until 7:15. Please have coffee, tea at the back of the room. Remember that if you'd like to speak with someone, Rob is in room 230, and we invite you to do that now or at any time through the rest of the event. So we'll see you back here at 7:15. So during the first part of our discussion, we talked about a major case and a major mandate that have come to occupy prominent spaces in your career and that have directly impacted to us LGBTQ+ communities. And you've obviously done this work as somebody who identifies as a cis straight woman. Do you consider yourself to be an ally to us LGBTQ communities today? And is that different than when you were on the bench?
You and I have had a bit of an extended discussion in building up to this, the questions and today about that concept, because when you started to put that into questions, I didn't really know what you meant. I mean, I knew what you meant, but in my context, I didn't know what you meant. And I was born and raised in Etobicoke. We were lower class, pay grade, or whatever you want to call it. My mother was one of 15 children, and she was taken out of school in grade 3 to be the nanny, and she never passed. She never finished grade 3, and she was illiterate until she died. And my father had grade 12, and our whole lives were the church. My father's father and grandfather and great-grandfather were all Baptist ministers. So I was raised in a very religious Baptist household. And so there was no broader conversation in our family. I realized when I was on the road to drive from Toronto to Kingston to go to Queens, I was leaving a house with one book. We didn't have books in our house. My father was too busy to read. My mother couldn't read. I mean, obviously I had school books and everything. But, and it was the Bible. That's the only book we had in the house. And I went to Queens. I went to Queens because I got a scholarship. I didn't know anything about anything. And so for me to engage in the broader issues of social issues was not something I ever even thought about. And then I somehow managed to get through 4 years of Queen's Commerce in days that were lots of fun. And maybe too much at times. But and then I didn't know what to do with my life, so I had a partner, and we went to Northern Ontario, a place called Temagami. And we borrowed money here and there, and we bought a fishing camp on an island to run a fishing camp. And after about 6 months, he decided that he didn't want to run a fishing camp. He wanted to be a hermit. Seriously. You cannot make this up. And so and he said, "Come on with me." I said, "I don't want to be a hermit." And this is the exact, and I said, "We've got a mortgage, and we've got payables and receivables and reservations and all this, and employees." So he went out to the middle of BC. He bought some land. He built a cabin by himself. He has no running water. He has no electricity. He's there today. And I just adore the man. And he's just brilliant. And we were very close friends. But, it was not, when it comes to sort of expanding horizons, I learned a lot about Indigenous people because I lived with them, the Ojibwe on Bear Island. And they were my neighbors. They were my community. So that was an important part of my evolution, if I had one. And then I came back to Toronto, and I worked as a cocktail waitress, put myself through U of T Law. But even then, we were just talking. at least at law school, you'd think you'd be engaged in some political discourse. I had 2 babies. And I was in law school. So I wasn't kind of hanging around and going for a beer after class to talk about the politics of the day. I had 2 babies. So, and my husband had 2 young boys from a previous marriage. I was busy. So, and then Faskins, I guess, was the first time I ever went anywhere where people were talking about anything other than just getting through the day. So when you talk about your evolution as an ally, and then, once you get to the court, you can't be an ally of anything or anybody. You've got to be, you just got to, the judge with the blinds on. It was really, and this is almost embarrassing but understandable, when I could kind of emerge and really develop overt caring, not the caring that I was holding inside me for all those years, because it was clearly there. But there's one thing I learned from my father in particular, is the importance of treating everyone equally. Everyone with respect, period. So we didn't have to talk about black, white, gay, not straight. We didn't have to talk about that, because it didn't come up when you treat everyone equally. And here's the way I always think it, and I try to explain it to somebody because it's fast and easy. And it goes like this. I love this story. This little boy goes to grade 1, and he comes home on Thursday for lunch, and he says to his mom, "I have a new best friend." And his mom says, "Oh, that's nice. What's your best friend's name?" "His name is Tommy." "That's a lovely name," she says. And then she says, "What color is Tommy?" And the little boy said, "I forgot to look." So that's the way I am, or I like to think I am, because that's how I was raised. So it doesn't necessarily turn you into an ally, but it just creates you to be an ally to anyone who's not treated equally, because that's really what you're an ally of, is equality.
And I think it's interesting to talk about this. This is why I wanted to ask you this question, is we have obviously members of our broader Queens community and the broader communities that live with us here in Toronto, who are here this evening, who are not also members of the 2S LGBTQ+ communities, but I am confident consider themselves allies and are interested to understand how they, from their positions, can do more to help us as a community to work in lockstep with us, to have our backs as communities that so frequently experience marginalization. And so this is why I think it's interesting to explore this with you, because there are a couple of issues now that are just imprinted with your name that have had quite significant impacts for us, or hopefully have significant impacts for us as members of 2S LGBTQ+ communities. So I think you've told us a little bit about how your experiences growing up demonstrated or allowed you to demonstrate empathy with marginalized communities. And we sit here now in a more privileged space, I think, this evening than perhaps when you were younger. And I wanted to ask you, sort of sitting in this position now, do you see yourself or those who are running in the same circles as you, excluding judges, having an obligation to leverage our positions or leverage positions to be effective allies for marginalized communities, including queer and trans communities?
I think the answer to that has to be yes. And I can't speak with how others who are privileged conduct their lives. I can only speak to my own, and I think about how unbelievably fortunate I am. I mean, coming out of the family I did, and arriving where I am sitting here is I'm so fortunate. And one of the things, even this week, I've been hired to be part of the purge litigation. And I went to an event a couple of weeks ago that celebrated the 30th anniversary of the action launched against the federal government based on discrimination of people in the RCMP, the armed forces, and other members of the federal government based on their being members of the LGBTQ2S+ communities. It was a very, very powerful evening. Mulroney spoke, and Blair spoke, I mean, all these, and the police were there, and you know what was, we sat at a table with gay judges and gay doctors and gay members of the clergy, and the room was filled with members of the LGBTQ2S+ communities who were privileged. And I can't remember who stood up and said, maybe it was Doug Elliott, stood up and he said, you know, if this event had taken place 30 years ago, you guys wouldn't have been here. You know, or at least you wouldn't, maybe you'd be here, but you wouldn't be here as doctors and lawyers and members of the clergy and judges. And he says, you'd have to depend on somebody like Gloria, who's straight, to get it right. Which is how he put it, which I thought was just a riot. But sad at the same time. So they're changing, but I think, and I go back to how fortunate I am, because I'm privileged now, not before, but I am now. I think when I get asked to come here tonight, that's a privilege. When I get asked to be part of the Purge team, that's a privilege. And so it gives me an additional incentive to say, yes, I'm going to be part of that, because it's part of my commitment to being an ally.
So this is where I've exhausted my, I mean, I haven't exhausted my
exhausted?
question. I'm not exhausted, I'm invigorated actually, and I have not exhausted my questions for you, but I am exhausted them from within the time limit that we have this evening, but I didn't want to, as a member of the community, not insert my own maybe calls to action for folks who do want to demonstrate allyship, or wondering what, especially in moments like this, what can I do, who are thinking about these issues. I will encourage you to continue to call for the Toronto Police to implement and act more, I'll say, speaking for myself, more transparently, more communicatively, and more, and as expeditiously as possible to implement the 151 recommendations that Justice Epstein so thoughtfully made. I would encourage people to elevate and amplify calls for police accountability. And I would also encourage folks to take advantage of some of the resources that we have here at the 519, specifically education programming, to engage in that yourself, to promote it in your workplaces, in your social circles. We have a program called Fostering Queer and Trans-Inclusive Environments at work and home. The resources are there to learn and easily accessible, and they're excellent. I mean, I know I'm biased as a 519 board member now, but I think I'm on solid footing here. I also want to encourage people to amplify calls to enact the Gender Affirming Healthcare Advisory Committee Act, which was reintroduced by Toronto Centre MPP Kristen Wong-Tam last week in the provincial legislature. And you can visit transhealthontario.org for just an actual list of things you can do to help agitate for this, what should be low-hanging fruit and uncontroversial, the establishment of an advisory committee to get the ball rolling on how we can create more trans-inclusive healthcare in Ontario, which is life-saving. So those are some of the things that, as a member of the communities, I would encourage folks to engage with and to amplify our calls for support, accountability, and action. This brings us to the audience question and answer portion of the evening, and I believe we have time for 3 questions. If folks have any, please feel free to raise your hand. Jen has a microphone over here, and we'll travel. I see a question over here, or I see a hand over here.
Hello. My question for you tonight is, I understand that, you were raised very religiously, but also you had great parents who told you that everyone is equal, we're all on the same playing field. But as you can see, people are treated very differently based off of what they believe and who they want to be. And everyone has a right to be who they want to be in truth. But as a judge, and I know we kind of discussed this already, what did you find was the most difficult aspect about mitigating your own personal biases? Had you developed them over the course of becoming who you are and up to the point of where you started interacting with people on a day-to-day basis with the process?
That's an important question about, I think it's an important challenge that each of us have. In trying to be honest with ourselves about ourselves. And can I sit here and look you in the eye and say, I absolutely don't have anything inside me that kind of like is hidden away and it's affecting my thoughts, my beliefs, my conduct? I can't say that. I try. I listen, and I read, and I engage, and if I think that maybe I've taken a misstep, I try to own it, and then I try to learn from it. But that's the best I can do. It's not as though, I could say, well, before this such and such a point in my life, I didn't believe in same-sex marriages, and now I do. Because I didn't have any of that in the beginning. I never thought it was different. I never thought about it at all. It was just everybody should be allowed to be who they are, as you said, to love who they want to, and to live the life that they choose to live as long as they don't hurt other people. So, I've presided over 6 same-sex marriages. I have to stop calling them same-sex marriages because they're marriages. But they're of all the weddings I've done, they are the ones that will stay with me the longest, because it meant so much for me to be part of that. But once again, I end where I started, and that is, I have to keep working on myself to make sure that I understand what's going on in there and that I'm correcting any or dealing with any problems that I see creeping up.
See another question here?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. I actually, my name is Amy Sujeli. I'm a Senior Manager of Diversity and Inclusion at Osler, Hoskin Harcourt LLP. This was one of the emails that came through my inbox as, you might be interested in this, and I showed up randomly, and it turned out to be such a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for both of you for your insights. Justice Epstein, I'm actually really curious about one statement that you made earlier about having gone through this process made me a far better judge. I really want to hear about that you elaborating on how so.
Let me give you a good example. It's got nothing to do with the LGBTQ2S plus issues, but it makes the point. When I started sentencing people, I put a lot of work into how I worded my sentences. I think sentencing someone is one of the most challenging things you could ever do. And because I'm trying to respond to the harm done to society, to people, whatever the crime was. But I'm also trying to encourage and leave hope, and so I'm developing all of that into my sentences. And I realize I'm staring into the eyes of these guys, most of them are guys, and they're looking at me like, lady, you have no idea what's going on. And I started to see that. So I went to a sentencing course in Vancouver. And I listened to some people who really knew how to sentence. I came back and I changed the way I sentenced. I changed, because to get to your, I was sentencing like I understood their pain, you know, and their lives and all of that. I didn't. I couldn't. So I've, to try to, as a judge, to try to, that was to me one of the best examples of what I thought I was doing initially was, you know, really great. It wasn't, it was patronizing. And so that's a process I went through all through my career as a judge, is to make sure I didn't sort of presume I knew the pain of the person with whom I was involved. Yeah.
Is there one last question? I see a hand at the back here.
Hi there, thank you. My name is David Phipps. You mentioned Ukraine, you've mentioned international presentations. Acknowledging that we've got 151 things to do, do you have a sense of how Toronto compares on the global stage?
Great question. Yeah, we do pretty well. There are countries that do better. London, England does way better. The UK, you know, whenever I needed an answer, I went to London. I didn't go, but this was after COVID started, so I got to go. And Australia. And a few cities in the US do a pretty good job. But I would say that when you compare us worldwide with the problems we do have, we're way closer to the top than we are to the bottom. And after yesterday, I keep going back to yesterday, like, it's going to be nirvana. No, and it's not going to be tomorrow. But I am really convinced that there is considerable dedication and commitment to doing it right. And as I said, and this is an important part of it, it's actually what's being done in the work by the implementation committee is spreading into the way other parts of policing are being done in the Toronto Police Service. So that's like a bonus. So, you know, if I can, and they're going to meet with me quarterly. I'm not going to be given the back of their hand anymore, no more of that. So we could get together quarterly and you could ask me for an update.
Well, I don't even care that you're joking about that. I'm going to take you up on that invitation. But thank you so much for this conversation this evening, Justice Epstein. It's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate your candor, and I appreciate your insight, and I think I speak for everyone here in saying it's just been a real treat to share the evening with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have some prepared notes, but I just need to add my thank you to both of you. I was sitting here tonight listening to the conversation and thinking about the privilege that it has been to be in this room with you, to hear your humility, your humor, to hear about your experiences and to hear all of your insights. And Pam, thank you for the challenge of asking us to think about what we do with that privilege. Thank you both sincerely from the bottom of my heart. My name is Karen Bertrand, and I am the Vice Principal of Advancement here at Queen's. And there are a number of people that I do need to express gratitude to for the conversation this afternoon. Thank you first and foremost to the Queer Alumni Chapter for hosting the discussion and providing an opportunity for all Queen's alumni to better understand the systemic barriers experienced by queer individuals, new immigrants, refugees, and racialized communities. This is an upsetting and painful topic, particularly for the communities most affected by the discrimination discussed this evening and experienced quite recently. We are grateful for your willingness to share these experiences for the betterment of all of our communities. Thank you also to the 519 for welcoming us and ensuring tonight's discussion could take place in a safe and affirming venue. I know the importance this space holds in the community and appreciate you sharing it with us. We're grateful for the generous financial support we've received from our event sponsors, Denton's Canada, Propeller Coffee, and the Queen's University Alumni Association. And of course, events like this require the cooperation and commitment of many individuals and partnerships across the entire university community. So thank you to our partners from the Smith School of Business, the Faculty of Law, the Queer Alumni Chapter, and the Queen's Toronto Alumni Branch for your support and dedication to this event and to our broader goals of building a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and anti-racist community in our curriculum and in our programming. Queen's is committed to bringing alumni community engaging, equity-focused learning opportunities that not only align with our direction as an institution, but also connect the university with communities beyond our campus. We hope these events strengthen your connection to our alumni network and prove meaningful to you and your communities. We welcome your feedback and we hope that you will join us again. The evening will continue, as I believe Jen mentioned, at the historic Glad Day Bookshop for a community reception hosted by the Faculty of Law. I understand it is the building with the pink awning, just a short walk down the road. And I invite everyone to join us for refreshments and continue the conversation. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening.